Norman McLaren was a pioneer and innovator throughout his long distinguished career. Among his many accomplishments, he developed new ways of thinking about animation, including hand-drawn animation, drawn-on-film animation, pixelation and graphical sound. As a filmmaker at the National Film Board of Canada, his films have been widely shown. His films have received enormous attention and have amazed millions of people over the years. McLaren worked alone for many years, but around the 1950s, he started working with Evelyn Lombard, who then became his co-director. Evelyn is a key character in Norman's working life. He described her as a precise animator, worker, and as a person with his same point of view in the art of animation.
As an assistant, but more and more we fitted in, and in some films she was really sort of co-directing them.
Norman McLaren is one of the fathers of experimental animation, for being one of the first to exploit the direct animation technique on celluloid. He also created and used multiple techniques that he implemented in his best-known works. Drawn-on-film animation is an animation technique where footage is produced by creating the images directly on film stock. In the 1930s, McLaren drew directly onto the film stock, frame by frame, so he didn't need a camera. But this also had some downsides. The film frame is tiny, a mere 16 or 35 millimeters across, and drawing onto such a tiny area meant that the image could only be very simple. This marvelous simplicity and directness was literally magnified when viewed on the big screen, but despite the downsides, McLaren managed to produce many successful short films full of energy and creativity. For example, Boogie Doodle 1941, Hen Hop 1942, Bag on Dolker 1949, and Blinkety Blank 1955. Undoubtedly, one of Norman McLaren's most outstanding techniques was pixelation, which is basically stop motion made with human bodies. This technique could offer jerky or impossible movements, and it was implemented in the film Neighbors 1952 and Cherry Tale 1957. McLaren also created the concept of animated sound, a form of visible sound made by synthetically hand-drawn directly onto soundtracks of the film. He discovered animated sound then by actually making marks with pen and ink on the soundtrack area of the film. A strip about 2 mm wide which runs along one of the edges of 35 mm film. For example, Synchrony 1971 and Dots 1940. Graphical sound is a sound recording created for images drawn directly onto film or paper that were then played back using a sound system. What McLaren did was directly place graphic marks on the surface of the celluloid. He did this by developing two methods, one by drawing or scratch directly on the film, and the other by photographing patterns onto its soundtrack area. Using 35mm film at the conventional speed of 24 frames per second, McLaren controlled pitch by the number of strokes per centimeter. The size of the stroke and the shade of ink controlled the volume. Long, black strokes produce loud sounds. Small, light gray strokes made soft ones.
Far apart, a low-pitched note, a medium, and a high note.
And timbre was controlled by the shape of the strokes. Well-rounded strokes made smooth sounds, and angular strokes make harder, harsher sounds. For example, 1951 pen point percussion, Neighbors 1952, which combines stop-motion pixelation with a graphical soundtrack. And Blinkety Blank 1955. And Synchrony 1971. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, McLaren began experimenting with synthetic sound and developing a large number of semi-musical effects. After freelancing around this time, he joined the renowned National Film Board of Canada and began developing innovative techniques that eliminated the need for a camera and required the artist to draw directly on film. For example, Neighbours 1952 and A Fantasy 1957. Chain of mixes was used by McLaren and consisted of metamorphosing light and shade in a pastel drawing.
This is the actual drawing I used. It's a bit of cardboard with a chalk representation on it.
Yes?
I used black and white chalks. And during the photographing of the film, I would change the drawing. For instance, if the sun was rising on this mountain scene, I would add white chalk to highlight the mountains.
So it's a series of constant changes to the same basic drawing.
That's right.
Photograph each change.
Yes. And after I'd lightened up the sky and the mountains a little bit more, we'd photograph some more of the picture. Then we'd stop the camera again, and I'd add some more details. I might introduce some clouds in the sky. Then the cameraman would photograph the picture in that stage, mixing it with the previous. And so on it went.
This test led directly to the film La Haut sur ces montagnes, 1946. McLaren's interest in the metamorphosis of light and shade was aroused by the Scottish environment of his formative years. Norman McLaren is considered one of the fathers of experimental animation, but like all artists, he was influenced and inspired by other avant-garde artists of the time for his brilliant work. Seeing the Russian classic silent films by Podavkin and Einstein symbolized a change in his way of conceiving cinema. Quoting his words, "These films move me so much. It revealed me what film could be." Moreover, McLaren often cited one of Oskar Fischinger's film, Study No. 7, as a major influence on his work.
It was only when I joined the Film Society in Glasgow that I saw the first abstract film, Brahms' Fifth Hungarian Rhapsody, made by Oskar Fischinger. I said, that's it. Film is the medium to express my feelings about music. And that led me on to maybe half of my whole output of films is the expression of the spirit of the music.
In his own earlier abstract films, from Boogie Doodle through Fiddle Dee Dee, Beg on Dolker to Short and Sweet, McLaren adopted a similar approach. Since he was a student, McLaren was also influenced by the surreal metamorphoses of Emily Cole or the expressionism of Alexander Alexeyev and Clary Parker. McLaren was influenced by Lan Li as well, who in 1935 had produced a publicity film, A Color Box, the first direct film to be screened before an audience. McLaren also said that he was not influenced from the late 1930s onwards by the subsequent artistic influences. He said, "I feel eternally grateful to the people who influenced me. They gave me the boost I needed when I started. Now I'm not really influenced by anyone."
McLaren's first entirely animated film, Love on the Wing, is an exercise in constant metamorphosis inspired by the example of Emile Cole, creator of the first cartoon, Phantasmagorie 1908. McLaren created the animation by drawing directly on 35mm film with pen and black India ink. When it was placed on the background negative, the final result took the form of thick white lines. Hen Hop is a film that describes to the rhythm of folk music or barn dance, the metamorphosis and figurative abstraction of a hand in movement synchronized with the music. This short film was, with color added optically afterwards, drawn in ink directly on celluloid 35, which is an important reference for animated experimentation. Getting to see Picasso exclaiming at the end of the projection, "Finally something new!" As a teenager, McLaren became interested in color music, an art form in which moving patterns of colored lights were projected. While in art school, McLaren and his classmate Stuart McAllister attempted to create color music by painting abstraction directly onto 35mm film. McLaren saw Len Leigh's revolutionary hand-painted on film color box and gave him the confidence to continue drawing directly from film. In Began Dull Care, in collaboration with Evelyn Lombard, is one of the most famous works by animation master Norman McLaren. It embodies two main characteristics of McLaren's film: the direct application of colors and image to the film itself, and the use of music as an integral part of the work. So Began Dull Care combined these two qualities so well and meticulously that the viewer can literally see and hear the music. McLaren also experimented in the 1952 Academy Award-winning film Neighbors, the stop motion to create the illusion of movement between real actors and them entirely in the film. He had been very intrigued by the French stunt movies of the early 20th century, in which everyday objects were animated frame by frame. McLaren called it the pixelation technique. He then wonders about the possibility of animating people frame by frame. This curiosity culminates in the extraordinary parable Neighbors, where two men go to war over a flower that springs from the soil between 2 yards. And at the end, in fact, the film was made during the Cold War, and McLaren said he made it to show the irrationality and counterness of man. Blankety Blank is an hand-drawn film where McLaren experiments with intermittency, leaving many frames blank. He described this as a sprinkling on the empty band of the time. So, reflecting on the use of abstraction in films of this kind, McLaren commented, "If you looked at a single frame of film, you would say that doesn't mean anything there. There is no images there, but once the thing goes into motion, the things that are there, no matter what kind of shape they may be, can behave in a human or animal way, which echoes something quite human in a person." McLaren in 1960 made with Canadian animator Evelyn Lombard a film in which a vertical line moves laterally and also multiplies, all the while gathering speed to reach a climactic frenzy of lines. McLaren observed that, perhaps through a subconscious awareness of gravity, horizontal moving lines engender a completely different kinesthetic response. So, for his next film, McLaren simply rotated each frame of lines vertical 1960 through 90 degrees using a prism and an optical printer. So he also changed the colors from muted to strident, swapped the calm sound of Maurice Blackburn's electronic piano for the dynamic strumming of Pete Seeger's music, and he had Lines Horizontal, 1962. In Pas de Deux, McLaren over-exhibited up to 10 times frame by frame a choreography of the dancer filmed in black and white and composed from the combination of slow motion with multi-dynamics images. The technique involves overexposure frame of the same film to generate the effect of doubling of the image in time and space. McLaren did it up to 10 times, thus creating visual effects that still amaze us nowadays. Unfortunately, Narcissus will be the last of the films produced by Norman McLaren before his death in 1987. In this short film by Norman McLaren, the dancers act out the Greek tragedy of Narcissus, the beautiful young man whose excessive self-esteem condemned him to a trapped existence. At the end, film, dance, and music are masterfully combined to celebrate the ancient myth and its eternal significance. So, the film is a compendium of techniques that McLaren acquired through a lifetime of experimentation. In conclusion, McLaren was an extraordinary artist, although despite not being so admired for his works, he was so for his technical innovation and constant experimentation with sound and animation. McLaren has always shown an interest in learning and discovering new ways of expression to show us the unattainable limits of animation, and starring his incredible shapes and movements. McLaren's exploration into the creative possibilities of filmmaking, especially in animation, continue to inspire artists. And as he said, an artist may be like a person who hears music and just starts dance.